For 2 years, Assistant U.S. Attorney Maya Richardson has built an airtight case against the Kwan crime family, meticulously documenting their operations from money laundering to human trafficking. She knows every detail of their business, every face in their organization, every weakness in their armor. What she doesn't know is that Kwon Jisoo has been watching her just as carefully, and tonight their worlds will collide in ways that will shatter everything both of them thought they understood about justice, loyalty, and the dangerous line between enemies and something far more complicated. At 26, Maya Richardson commanded respect in every federal courtroom from Seattle to San Francisco. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant twist that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. She wore her authority like armor. Every tailored blazer and crisp white shirt a declaration that she belonged in rooms full of powerful men who tried to dismiss her. Maya had earned her position through relentless work, graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Law and spending 3 years in the prosecutor's office building an impeccable conviction rate. She was practical, focused, and absolutely committed to bringing down the Korean organized crime syndicate that had turned the Pacific Northwest into their personal empire. Tonight she sat in the corner booth of Samsara, one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, wearing a simple black dress that could pass for dinner attire while concealing the recording equipment sewn into the lining. Her case against the Kwan family needed one more piece of evidence. One conversation that would tie Kwon Jisoo directly to the human trafficking operation that had claimed dozens of lives. The FBI surveillance team thought she was taking unnecessary risks by conducting this operation herself, but Maya knew that 2 years of investigation had made her the only person who could recognize the subtle signals and coded language that Kwon Jisoo used to conduct business. The restaurant itself was a study in understated luxury, all warm lighting and rich textures that whispered rather than shouted about the wealth required to dine here. Maya sipped her wine slowly, her eyes tracking every face that entered through the main entrance while her trained legal mind cataloged details that might prove useful in court. The soft murmur of conversation in multiple languages created perfect cover for her surveillance, and the strategic placement of her booth allowed her to observe the private dining rooms where the most sensitive conversations took place. Kwon Jisoo entered at exactly 9:15, just as her intelligence had predicted. At 34, he moved through the restaurant with the quiet confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. His black wool coat was custom-tailored, probably Italian, definitely more expensive than Maya's monthly salary. Underneath, his charcoal suit fit him perfectly, emphasizing broad shoulders and a lean build that suggested physical capability beneath the sophisticated exterior. His dark hair was styled precisely, not a strand out of place, and his features were sharp and aristocratic in a way that commanded attention without effort. But it was his presence that truly set him apart. Kwon Jisoo possessed the kind of controlled intensity that made conversation stop when he walked past, the sense that violence lived just beneath that immaculate surface, carefully leashed but always ready. Waiters moved to accommodate him without being asked. Other diners instinctively lowered their voices, and Maya found herself holding her breath as he passed within 10 feet of her table. She had studied hundreds of photographs of Kwon Jisoo, reviewed countless hours of surveillance footage, memorized every known detail of his operations. But seeing him in person was like the difference between studying a tiger in textbooks and suddenly finding one in the wild. The photographs had captured his physical appearance, but missed the essential quality that made him dangerous. The magnetic pull of absolute authority that drew attention even as it warned people to stay away. Maya forced herself to look down at her menu, every instinct screaming that staring too long would expose her surveillance. She was a federal prosecutor who had spent 2 years building a case against this man. She was not some civilian who could be intimidated by expensive clothes and dangerous charisma. She had seen what his organization did to people who crossed them, had interviewed the survivors, and documented the evidence that would put him in prison for the rest of his life. Kwon Jisoo paused at the hostess station, speaking quietly with the elegant Korean woman who managed the restaurant's most exclusive reservations. From her peripheral vision, Maya watched him gesture toward the private dining rooms in the back, exactly where her intelligence suggested tonight's meeting would take place. Everything was proceeding according to plan. She would position herself to observe the meeting, record whatever conversations she could capture, and finally have the evidence needed to connect Kwon Jisoo directly to the trafficking operation. Then he looked directly at her. The connection was instantaneous and electric, like touching a live wire. Maya felt her carefully constructed cover story evaporate under the weight of Kwon Jisoo's direct gaze. His dark eyes were intelligent, calculating, and completely focused on her face in a way that made her skin feel too warm and her pulse accelerate despite every professional instinct telling her to remain calm. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they stared at each other across the restaurant, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, though Maya was no longer entirely certain which of them was which. She should look away. Every tactical training session had emphasized the importance of avoiding direct eye contact during surveillance operations. But something about Kwon Jisoo's gaze held her frozen, as if he could see straight through her cover story to the federal badge and case files that defined her real identity. Maya felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with her professional situation and everything to do with the way his lips curved into the slightest suggestion of a smile when he realized she wasn't going to back down. Kwon Jisoo said something to the hostess, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. The woman nodded and retreated, and Maya watched with growing alarm as Kwon Jisoo began walking directly toward her table. Every alarm bell in her head was screaming that this was wrong, that her cover was blown, that she needed to abort the operation immediately. But her body refused to move, her mind unable to process the reality that her target was approaching her with the confident stride of a man who had nothing to fear from federal prosecutors or anyone else. He stopped beside her table, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that probably cost more than her car payment. Up close, his features were even more striking, all sharp angles and controlled power that made her heart race in ways that had absolutely nothing to do with professional fear and everything to do with pure feminine response to masculine danger. "May I join you?" Kwon Jisoo asked, his English perfect and completely without accent. His voice was low, cultured, the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. Maya's training kicked in automatically, years of courtroom experience allowing her to maintain composure even as her mind raced through the implications of this development. "I'm waiting for someone," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "No," Kwon Jisoo said simply, sliding into the booth across from her without invitation. "You're not." The certainty in his voice sent a chill down Maya's spine. He knew. Somehow, despite all her preparation and the FBI's careful planning, he had identified her surveillance operation. Maya forced herself to maintain her cover even as her hand moved instinctively toward the panic button sewn into her dress. "I think you have me confused with someone else." Assistant U.S. Attorney Maya Richardson, Kwon Jisoo said quietly, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "Harvard Law Review, Class of 2021. Currently building a RICO case against my family's business operations. 2 years of investigation, 47 surveillance operations, and tonight you decided to observe my meeting with the Yamamoto representative personally." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Every detail was correct, information that should have been classified at the highest levels. The FBI had assured her that her identity was protected, that Kwon Jisoo had no way of connecting her to the investigation. Yet here he sat, reciting her credentials with the casual accuracy of someone reading from her personnel file. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Kwon Jisoo smiled, and the expression transformed his face from merely handsome to devastatingly attractive. The change was so dramatic that Maya found herself staring despite every instinct warning her to run. "You're very good," he said. "If I hadn't been specifically watching for federal surveillance, I might have missed you entirely. But you made one mistake." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "What mistake?" "You ordered the domain de la Romanicanti," Kwon Jisoo explained, gesturing toward her wine glass. "Excellent choice, but that particular vintage costs $800 a bottle. No federal employee orders wine that expensive on a government expense account, even when trying to blend in at an exclusive restaurant." The observation was so accurate and so professionally astute that Maya felt a reluctant surge of respect despite her fear. He had caught her through attention to detail that would have impressed her law professors, the kind of careful observation that separated competent investigators from exceptional ones. She was trapped, her cover blown, but some part of her professional mind couldn't help admiring the skill with which he had exposed her operation. "You're very observant," Maya said carefully. "It keeps me alive," Kwon Jisoo replied. "In my business, the difference between survival and prison often comes down to noticing what doesn't belong. You, Attorney Richardson, definitely don't belong here tonight." Maya weighed her options rapidly. She could continue denying her identity, but Kwon Jisoo clearly knew exactly who she was. She could attempt to leave, but something in his relaxed posture suggested he wouldn't make it that simple. Or she could acknowledge the situation and try to salvage something useful from this disaster of an operation. "What do you want?" Maya asked. "To offer you some advice," Kwon Jisoo said. "The Yamamoto family has been tracking federal surveillance for weeks. They know about tonight's operation, know that you're here, and have plans to send a very direct message about interfering with their business arrangements. You're in considerably more danger than you realize." Maya felt her blood turn cold. If rival crime families were targeting federal investigators directly, the situation had escalated far beyond anything the FBI had prepared for. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because killing a federal prosecutor would bring unwanted attention to Seattle," Kwon Jisoo said simply. "It's bad for business, creates unnecessary complications, and I prefer my operations to remain invisible. Your death tonight would solve nothing and create problems for everyone involved." The casual way he discussed her potential murder should have terrified Maya, but instead she found herself analyzing his words with the same clinical precision she brought to legal briefs. He was offering information that could save her life, but his motivations were entirely practical rather than personal. Kwon Jisoo saw her as a business problem to be managed, not a human being whose death would have moral implications. "What kind of message were they planning to send?" Maya asked. "The kind that would end your investigation permanently," Kwon Jisoo replied, "and ensure that no other federal prosecutors would be eager to take your place." Maya reached for her phone, intending to contact her FBI backup team, but Kwon Jisoo's hand covered hers before she could dial. His touch was warm, firm, and completely confident, the grip of someone accustomed to controlling every situation through presence alone. "I wouldn't recommend involving your colleagues," he said quietly. "The Yamamoto family has resources within federal law enforcement. Calling for backup might simply accelerate their timeline." Maya stared at him, trying to process the implications of what he was suggesting. If the Yamamoto family had corrupted federal agents, her entire investigation could be compromised. Every piece of evidence, every strategic decision, every operational detail might have been leaked to the very criminals she was trying to prosecute. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Maya asked. "You don't," Kwon Jisoo admitted. "But in approximately 15 minutes, 3 men will enter this restaurant and attempt to escort you to a private conversation that you won't survive. You can choose to trust my warning and leave now, or you can wait and discover whether I'm lying." Maya looked into his dark eyes, searching for some hint of deception. Everything about Kwon Jisoo radiated controlled danger, but she couldn't detect the specific malice she would expect from someone planning to harm her. If anything, he seemed genuinely concerned about her safety, though she couldn't understand why a crime boss would care about protecting the prosecutor trying to destroy him. "Why should I trust you?" Maya asked. "Because," Kwon Jisoo said, reaching into his jacket and withdrawing a business card that he placed on the table between them, "sometimes enemies share common interests. Tonight, neither of us benefits from your death." Maya picked up the card, noting the expensive paper and understated design. It contained only a phone number, no name or business identification. "For when you need help with Korean translations," Kwon Jisoo said, with that same devastating smile. Maya slipped the card into her purse, her mind racing through the implications of everything that had just happened. Her surveillance operation was blown, her safety was compromised, and she was accepting advice from the man she had spent 2 years trying to arrest. Nothing about this situation made sense according to everything she understood about law enforcement and criminal behavior. "I should go," Maya said, starting to rise from the booth. "Yes," Kwon Jisoo agreed, but he made no move to let her pass. "One more thing, Attorney Richardson." Maya paused, suddenly aware of how close they were in the confined space of the booth. "What?" Your case against my family is impressive, Kwon Jisoo said quietly. Thorough, well-researched, and professionally constructed. But you're investigating symptoms rather than causes. The real power in Seattle's criminal network isn't Korean. Before Maya could ask what he meant, Kwon Jisoo slid out of the booth and disappeared toward the private dining rooms, leaving her alone with questions that would haunt her for days to come. Maya sat for another moment, processing everything that had happened, then gathered her belongings and walked calmly toward the exit, every instinct screaming that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. As she reached the restaurant's entrance, Maya glanced back once and saw 3 men in dark suits entering through the side door, their eyes scanning the dining room with professional intensity. Kwon Jisoo's warning had been accurate to the minute, and Maya realized with growing unease that she now owed her life to the very man she had sworn to bring to justice. The first message arrived at Maya's federal office 3 days after her encounter with Kwon Jisoo at Samsara. A single photograph slipped under her door during the night shift change, showing her walking to her car in the federal building's parking garage. No words, no demands, just the clear implication that someone was watching her every movement. Maya stared at the image, her hands trembling slightly as she recognized the angle and timing. Whoever had taken this photo had been close enough to touch her, close enough to do considerably more than simply document her routine. Maya Richardson had built her reputation on fearlessness, on walking into courtrooms full of defense attorneys who tried to intimidate young prosecutors with aggressive tactics and hostile witnesses. She had stared down drug dealers and money launderers, had received death threats from 3 different organized crime syndicates, and had never once allowed criminal intimidation to interfere with her pursuit of justice. But this photograph felt different, more personal, as if someone had reached directly into her carefully controlled professional life and reminded her that all her federal authority meant nothing when she was alone in a parking garage at midnight. She should report the incident immediately. FBI protocol required documentation of all threats against federal prosecutors, and her supervisor would want to implement additional security measures within hours. But Maya found herself hesitating, remembering Kwon Jisoo's warning about corruption within federal law enforcement. If the Yamamoto family truly had resources inside the FBI, reporting this threat might simply provide them with more information about her investigation and her security arrangements. Maya locked the photograph in her desk drawer and continued preparing for that morning's grand jury session. She had spent 2 years building this case against the Kwon family, documenting their operations with meticulous precision, and she refused to be deterred by intimidation tactics that were probably designed to make her abandon her investigation. The grand jury was scheduled to hear testimony from 3 key witnesses, evidence that would finally connect Kwon Jisoo directly to the human trafficking operation that had destroyed so many lives. But the witnesses never appeared. The first, a dock worker who had documented container shipments for the Kwon organization, called in sick with what his supervisor described as a sudden family emergency. The second, an accountant who had laundered money through offshore shell companies, failed to appear entirely, and when Maya contacted his attorney, she learned that he had withdrawn his cooperation agreement and refused all further contact with federal investigators. The third witness, a young woman who had escaped from a trafficking operation, was found dead in her apartment that morning from what police initially classified as a drug overdose. Maya stared at the empty witness chair, her mind reeling from the systematic destruction of her case. 3 witnesses, 3 different methods of silencing, all coordinated to occur on the same morning when their testimony would have been most damaging. This wasn't random criminal intimidation. Someone with detailed knowledge of her investigation had planned and executed a precise strike designed to cripple her prosecution permanently. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The case dies with you," it read. "Walk away while you still can." Maya's blood ran cold as she read the words. The message was clear enough, but what terrified her most was the timing. She was sitting in a federal courthouse, surrounded by marshals and security personnel, yet someone had sent this threat to her personal phone during the exact moment when she discovered her witnesses had been eliminated. Someone was watching her every move, monitoring her investigation, and demonstrating the ability to reach her anywhere at any time. That afternoon, Maya met with FBI agent Sarah Chun, her primary contact for the Quan investigation. They sat in a secure conference room 3 floors below the federal building's main level, surrounded by white noise generators and signal-blocking technology designed to prevent electronic surveillance. Maya had worked with Agent Chen for 18 months, trusted her judgment and her commitment to bringing down organized crime in the Pacific Northwest. "The threats are escalating," Agent Chen said, reviewing Maya's report of the morning's events. "Eliminating 3 witnesses simultaneously requires significant resources and coordination. We need to implement protective custody immediately." Maya shook her head firmly. "Protective custody means abandoning the investigation, and I'm not ready to let them win that easily. We still have physical evidence, financial records, surveillance footage. The case isn't dead yet." Agent Chen leaned forward, her expression concerned. "Maya, these people have demonstrated the ability to reach inside our investigation and eliminate witnesses. They know details about our operations that should be classified at the highest levels. Someone is feeding them information, and until we identify the leak, you're completely exposed." Maya felt a chill run down her spine as she processed the implications of what Agent Chen was saying. If there truly was a leak within federal law enforcement, then every security measure, every safe house, every protection detail could be compromised. Accepting FBI protection might simply make it easier for her enemies to find her. "I'll be careful," Maya said. "But I won't hide while criminals destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. We've come too far to abandon the case now." Agent Chen studied her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "At least accept a security detail for the next few weeks. Let us assign agents to monitor your apartment and your office." Maya agreed to limited surveillance, knowing it would make Agent Chen feel better about allowing her to continue the investigation. But as she left the federal building that evening, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched by eyes that had nothing to do with FBI protection. Every shadow seemed to conceal potential threats. Every stranger on the street could be an enemy, and the comfortable routine of her professional life had been replaced by constant vigilance that left her exhausted and on edge. Maya's apartment building was an older brick structure in Capitol Hill, chosen specifically for its security features and proximity to the federal courthouse. The building required keycard access, had cameras in all common areas, and maintained a doorman during evening hours. Maya had always felt completely safe here, protected by multiple layers of security that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to reach her without authorization. She noticed the broken lock on her apartment door immediately. Maya froze in the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the door frame. The lock had been picked professionally, the wood around the deadbolt carefully splintered to suggest forced entry rather than sophisticated criminal technique. Someone had wanted her to know they had been inside, had deliberately left evidence of their intrusion rather than attempting to conceal their presence. Maya reached for her phone to call building security, then hesitated. If someone had penetrated her apartment's security, they might still be inside, waiting for her return. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to call for backup, to let trained federal agents secure her living space before she entered. But Maya found herself stepping through the doorway, driven by the need to see what damage had been done, what message her enemies had left for her to discover. Her apartment had been systematically searched, but not destroyed. File cabinets had been opened and their contents scattered across her living room floor, but nothing appeared to be missing. Her computer remained on her desk, her television and electronics were undisturbed, and even her jewelry box sat untouched on her bedroom dresser. This wasn't a robbery. Someone had broken into her home to send a message, to demonstrate their ability to reach her anywhere, to remind her that all her security measures were ultimately meaningless against determined criminal organizations. Maya knelt among the scattered papers, trying to determine what her intruders had been seeking. Case files, legal briefs, evidence photographs, witness statements, all mixed together in deliberate chaos. But as she began sorting through the documents, Maya realized that nothing was actually missing. Whoever had searched her apartment had been looking for something specific, had examined every piece of paper related to her investigation, but had left everything behind as if to say that they already possessed all the information they needed. Her phone rang, startling her so badly that she nearly dropped it. The caller ID showed an unknown number, and Maya hesitated before answering, remembering the threatening text message from that morning. "Hello, Maya." Kwon Jisu's voice was calm, controlled, completely at odds with the chaos surrounding her. "I understand you've had some uninvited visitors tonight." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "How do you know about my apartment?" "Because I've been watching the men who broke into your home," Kwon Jisu replied. "They've been following you for 3 days, documenting your routine, looking for the best opportunity to deliver their message. Unfortunately, they're not finished with you yet." Maya moved to her window, peering through the blinds at the street below. "What do you mean not finished?" "They're waiting in the parking garage of your office building," Kwon Jisu said. 3 men, armed, with instructions to have a very direct conversation with you about abandoning your investigation. "They believe you'll be working late tonight, as you have every night this week." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She had planned to return to her office after securing her apartment, to work through the night rebuilding her case files and identifying new avenues for investigation. If Kwon Jisu was telling the truth, she would be walking directly into an ambush designed to end her involvement in the Kwon investigation permanently. "Why are you warning me?" Maya asked. "Because your death tonight serves no one's interests," Kwon Jisu replied. "It would bring unwanted federal attention to Seattle, complicate business relationships, and solve none of the underlying problems that led to this situation." Maya processed his words, trying to understand the complex motivations behind his assistance. Kwon Jisu was the target of her investigation, the man she had spent 2 years trying to arrest and prosecute. Yet he was providing intelligence that could save her life, protecting her from enemies who apparently posed a greater threat than he did. "What do you suggest I do?" Maya asked. "Stay away from your office tonight," Kwon Jisu said. "Let me handle the men in your parking garage. Tomorrow, we should meet and discuss a more permanent solution to your security problems." Maya's legal training rebelled against the idea of accepting help from a criminal organization, but her survival instincts recognized that she was facing threats beyond anything the FBI could protect her from. If rival crime families were targeting federal prosecutors directly, if there were leaks within federal law enforcement, if her enemies could penetrate her apartment security and eliminate her witnesses, then conventional protection might be worse than useless. "I can't accept your help," Maya said. "It would compromise my investigation, my position, my entire career." "Attorney Richardson," Kwon Jisu said quietly, "if you're dead, you won't have a career to protect. Sometimes survival requires pragmatic choices that don't fit neatly into professional ethical guidelines." The phone went silent, leaving Maya alone with her racing thoughts and the scattered evidence of how vulnerable she truly was. She walked through her apartment once more, trying to process everything that had happened, everything she had learned, everything that Kwon Jisu's warnings implied about the true nature of the threats she faced. Maya decided to spend the night in a hotel, using cash to avoid creating any electronic trail that might lead her enemies to her location. As she packed a small overnight bag, she found herself thinking about Kwon Jisu's business card, still tucked in her purse from their encounter at Samsara. "For when you need help with Korean translations," he had said. But Maya was beginning to understand that the translation she needed most was how to survive in a world where federal authority provided no protection against enemies who played by completely different rules. The next morning, Maya's phone contained a text message from the same unknown number that had threatened her the day before. "Your office building parking garage has been cleaned," it read. "The conversation you were supposed to have last night has been postponed indefinitely." Maya stared at the message, understanding that Kwon Jisu had made good on his promise to handle the men who had been waiting for her. She didn't want to think about what cleaned meant, didn't want to consider the methods a Korean crime boss might use to ensure that rival gangsters stopped threatening federal prosecutors. But she couldn't deny that she was alive this morning specifically because Kwon Jisu had intervened to protect her from enemies she hadn't even known were targeting her. When Maya arrived at the federal building that morning, she found Agent Chen waiting in her office with coffee and a concerned expression. "We found 3 abandoned vehicles in the parking garage last night," Agent Chen said. "No signs of violence, no indication of where their occupants went, but the license plates traced back to shell companies connected to the Yamamoto family." Maya nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral. "Any theories about what happened to them?" "They disappeared," Agent Chen said simply. "Professional extraction, no evidence left behind. No witnesses, no surveillance footage." Someone with significant resources sent a message to the Yamamoto family about threatening federal investigators. Maya poured herself coffee with hands that shook slightly. Thinking about Kwon Jisu's calm voice on the phone, his matter-of-fact discussion of cleaning up threats to her safety. She was a federal prosecutor who had built her career on the rule of law, on the principle that justice came through legal procedures and constitutional protections. Yet she was alive this morning because a Korean crime boss had used extra-legal methods to eliminate threats that the FBI hadn't even detected. Agent Shin studied Maya's face carefully. "Is there something you want to tell me about last night?" Maya met her eyes steadily, making a decision that would haunt her conscience for months to come. "No," she said. "Nothing happened last night that's relevant to our investigation." Maya spent the morning reviewing security footage from her office building's parking garage, trying to understand what had happened to the 3 men who had been waiting to ambush her. The FBI's technical team had enhanced every available angle, but the results only deepened the mystery. At 11:47 p.m., 3 vehicles entered the parking garage and took strategic positions near the elevator banks. At 11:52 p.m., a 4th vehicle arrived, and 4 figures emerged to approach the waiting men. By 12:03 a.m., all 7 individuals had vanished, leaving behind 3 abandoned cars and no trace of where they had gone. Agent Shin called it a professional extraction, but Maya understood it was something far more permanent. Kwon Jisu had eliminated the Yamamoto family's surveillance team with surgical precision, removing a threat to her safety while ensuring that no evidence remained to implicate anyone in criminal activity. The message was clear to everyone involved in Seattle's criminal underworld, Maya suspected. Threatening Assistant U.S. Attorney Maya Richardson would bring swift and decisive retaliation from the Kwon organization. The implications terrified her more than the original threats had. Maya was a federal prosecutor who had built her career on constitutional law and due process, on the principle that justice came through legal procedures rather than vigilante violence. Yet she was alive this morning specifically because Kwon Jisu had used methods that were completely outside the law, had protected her through means she couldn't acknowledge without compromising everything she believed about her profession and her principles. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Library Hotel, Presidential Suite, 7 p.m. tonight. We need to discuss your long-term security situation." The message was unsigned, but Maya recognized Kwon Jisu's direct communication style immediately. Maya stared at the phone, her mind racing through the implications of meeting with her investigation target in a private setting. Every regulation governing federal prosecutors prohibited unauthorized contact with criminal suspects, particularly suspects who were the subject of active investigations. Meeting with Kwon Jisu would violate multiple ethical guidelines and could result in her disbarment if discovered by the Justice Department's Internal Affairs Division. But the alternative was continuing to pretend that FBI protection could keep her safe from enemies who had already demonstrated their ability to penetrate federal security, eliminate witnesses, and reach her anywhere she attempted to hide. Maya had spent 3 days reviewing threat assessment protocols and protective custody procedures, and every option required her to abandon her investigation and accept that the criminals had won through intimidation rather than legal challenge. That evening, Maya took 3 different taxi rides and walked 2 blocks through downtown Seattle before entering the Library Hotel through a side entrance that avoided the main lobby's security cameras. She had changed clothes twice, wore a baseball cap that concealed her distinctive hair, and paid for everything in cash to avoid creating any electronic trail that could connect her to this meeting. If anyone from the Justice Department discovered her presence here, her career would be over immediately. The presidential suite occupied the entire top floor of the hotel, accessible only through a private elevator that required a special keycard to operate. Maya rode up in silence, her heart hammering against her ribs as she prepared to cross a line that would fundamentally change her relationship with the law she had sworn to uphold. When the elevator doors opened, she found herself in an elegantly appointed foyer with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. Kwon Jisu stood with his back to the elevator, silhouetted against the Seattle skyline in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his controlled bearing and quiet authority. He turned as she entered, and Maya was struck again by the intensity of his presence. the way he commanded attention without effort or artifice. His dark eyes assessed her quickly, noting her casual clothes and nervous posture with the professional evaluation of someone accustomed to reading people's intentions through their body language. "Attorney Richardson," Kwon Jisoo said, gesturing toward a seating area arranged around a marble coffee table. "Thank you for coming tonight." Maya remained standing near the elevator, every instinct warning her that accepting his hospitality would make leaving more difficult when this conversation inevitably turned in directions she couldn't professionally tolerate. "I can't stay long," she said. "This meeting violates multiple Justice Department regulations." "I understand the risks you're taking by being here," Kwon Jisoo replied. "But I believe the risks of not having this conversation are considerably greater for both of us." Maya studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. What she found instead was genuine concern, an expression of worry that seemed completely at odds with his reputation for ruthless criminal efficiency. "Mr. Kwon, I appreciate your warning about the threats to my safety, but I can't accept help from someone who's the subject of my investigation." "The subject of your investigation," Kwon Jisoo said with a slight smile, "is a Korean organized crime syndicate that controls human trafficking, money laundering, and drug distribution throughout the Pacific Northwest. But you're investigating the wrong Korean organized crime syndicate." Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. "What do you mean wrong syndicate?" Kwon Jisoo moved to the coffee table, where several manila folders were arranged in precise order. "The Kwon family organization that you've been documenting for 2 years controls legitimate businesses throughout Seattle and Vancouver. Real estate development, shipping logistics, financial consulting, technology investment. We employ over 3,000 people in legal operations that generate approximately $200 million in annual revenue." Maya stared at the folders, recognizing case file markings and evidence documentation. "How did you get these?" she asked. "Because we've been conducting our own investigation," Kwon Jisoo replied. "For the past 18 months, someone has been using the Kwon family name to cover illegal operations that have nothing to do with our organization. Human trafficking, drug distribution, money laundering through shell companies registered in our corporate network without our knowledge or authorization." Maya approached the table slowly, her legal mind immediately recognizing the implications of what Kwon Jisoo was suggesting. If criminals were using his family's legitimate businesses as cover for illegal operations, then her entire investigation had been targeting the wrong organization. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every surveillance operation had documented the symptoms rather than the source of criminal activity in Seattle's Korean community. Kwon Jisoo opened the first folder, revealing photographs and financial documents that Maya had never seen before. "The Yamamoto family has been operating under Kwon family identification for 2 years, he explained. "They use our shipping manifests to transport human trafficking victims, our real estate properties as safe houses, our financial networks to launder drug money." When federal investigators began documenting these activities, they naturally assumed the Kwon family was responsible. Maya picked up one of the photographs, studying the faces of men she had never seen in any of her surveillance operations. "These people aren't in any of my case files," she said. "Because you've been watching our legitimate operations while the Yamamoto family conducted their illegal business under our protection," Kwon Jisoo said. "They've been very careful to keep their criminal activities separate from our legal operations, but they've been using our reputation and our network to hide their true activities from federal investigation." Maya felt her world tilting as she processed the implications of what she was learning. 2 years of investigation, dozens of surveillance operations, hundreds of hours of evidence collection, all focused on legitimate businesses while the real criminals operated invisibly under the cover of the Kwon family's reputation. If Kwon Jisoo was telling the truth, then her entire case was built on a fundamental misunderstanding of Seattle's criminal landscape. "Why should I believe you?" Maya asked. "Because," Kwon Jisoo said, opening another folder to reveal FBI surveillance photographs of her own apartment building, "the Yamamoto family has been planning to eliminate you for weeks. They know that your investigation is getting close to exposing their operations, and they've decided that killing a federal prosecutor is preferable to allowing their criminal network to be discovered." Maya stared at the surveillance photos, recognizing angles and timing that could only have been taken by someone with intimate knowledge of her daily routine. The images showed her leaving for work, returning home, walking to her car, entering the federal building. Someone had been documenting her movements with the precision of a professional assassination team. The FBI can't protect you from this level of threat, Kwon Jisoo continued. The Yamamoto family has resources within federal law enforcement, contacts who provide them with classified information about your investigation and your security arrangements. Every safe house, every protection detail, every attempt to relocate, you will be compromised before you arrive. Maya sank into one of the chairs, her mind reeling from the scale of the conspiracy she was uncovering. If the Yamamoto family truly had corrupted federal agents, if they were using the Kwon family's legitimate operations as cover for criminal activities, if they were willing to murder federal prosecutors to protect their operations, then she was facing threats that went far beyond anything the Justice Department had prepared her to handle. What are you proposing? Maya asked. Temporary relocation to a secure location that the Yamamoto family cannot penetrate, Kwon Jisoo said. Complete protection until we can eliminate the threat to your safety permanently. In exchange, you would have access to intelligence about the Yamamoto family's actual operations, evidence that would allow you to build a real case against the people responsible for the crimes you've been investigating. Maya looked up at him, trying to process the enormity of what he was offering. You're asking me to stay in your penthouse. I'm asking you to accept protection from people who have successfully maintained operational security against federal surveillance for 2 years, Kwon Jisoo replied. The Yamamoto family has penetrated FBI communication networks, corrupted federal agents, and eliminated your witnesses. They cannot penetrate Kwon family security systems. Maya stood up abruptly, pacing to the windows overlooking the city. The ethical implications of what Kwon Jisoo was proposing were staggering. Accepting protection from a crime family would compromise her investigation, her professional credibility, and her sworn oath to uphold federal law without fear or favor. But refusing his offer meant continuing to pretend that conventional law enforcement could protect her from enemies who had already demonstrated their ability to reach her anywhere. I can't accept help from someone I'm investigating, Maya said. It would violate every ethical guideline that governs federal prosecutors. Attorney Richardson, Kwon Jisoo said quietly, 3 federal prosecutors have been killed in the past 5 years while investigating organized crime in the Pacific Northwest. Sarah Mitchell in Portland was found dead in her apartment from an apparent suicide that the FBI privately believes was staged. David Park in Vancouver disappeared entirely and was never found. Jennifer Wu in San Francisco died in a car accident that occurred after someone sabotaged her brake lines. Maya turned to stare at him, horror growing in her chest as she processed what he was saying. You're telling me that federal prosecutors have been systematically murdered. I'm telling you that accepting FBI protection offers no guarantee of survival when your enemies have resources inside federal law enforcement, Kwon Jisoo replied. Every previous prosecutor who refused alternative security arrangements is dead. Maya walked back to the coffee table, staring at the evidence Kwon Jisoo had assembled. Her mind raced through the implications of everything she had learned tonight. If she continued relying on FBI protection, she would likely be dead within weeks. If she accepted Kwon Jisoo's help, she would be compromising her professional integrity in ways that might destroy her career even if she survived. But if she died, her investigation would die with her. The Yamamoto family would continue operating under the cover of Kwon family legitimacy. Victims would continue suffering, and the criminals responsible would never face justice. Maya realized with growing clarity that survival was not just a personal issue, but a professional obligation. She could not serve justice if she was dead. What would be the terms of this arrangement? Maya asked. Temporary residence in a secure location for as long as necessary to eliminate the threat to your safety, Kwon Jisoo said. Complete access to intelligence about Yamamoto family operations. Protection provided by security personnel who are not compromised by federal information leaks. In exchange, you would continue your investigation with resources and intelligence that the FBI cannot provide. Maya processed the offer carefully, her legal training automatically identifying the practical implications. And after the Yamamoto family is eliminated as a threat, You would return to your normal life with evidence sufficient to prosecute the people actually responsible for the crimes you've been investigating, Kwon Jisoo said. Your case would be stronger, your conviction rate would be higher, and Seattle would be safer for everyone. Maya sat down again, staring at her hands as she weighed options that all seemed impossible from a conventional ethical perspective. She could refuse Kwon Jisoo's offer and likely be dead within days. She could accept his offer and compromise her professional integrity in ways that might end her career. Or she could abandon her investigation entirely and allow criminals to continue operating without federal interference. She thought about the trafficking victims she had interviewed, young women who had suffered unimaginable horrors while being transported through Seattle's criminal network. She thought about the families destroyed by drug distribution networks that operated with impunity because federal investigators were targeting the wrong organizations. She thought about the other prosecutors who had died trying to bring justice to victims of organized crime. Maya realized that her choice was not between ethical purity and professional compromise. Her choice was between effective law enforcement and meaningless martyrdom. If accepting Kwon Jisoo's protection allowed her to survive long enough to prosecute the real criminals, then her professional obligations required her to make that choice regardless of the personal cost. I want specific terms, Maya said. Time limits on the arrangement, clear boundaries about what information I can access, explicit agreements about what happens when the threat is eliminated. Of course, Kwon Jisoo replied. This is a business arrangement, not a personal relationship. All terms will be clearly defined and mutually agreed upon. Maya took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything about her life and her career. I accept your offer, she said. When do we begin? Tonight, Kwon Jisoo said. The Yamamoto family is planning another attempt to reach you tomorrow morning. By then, you need to be somewhere they cannot find you. Maya nodded, her mind already racing through the practical implications of what she had agreed to do. She was about to disappear from her normal life, to accept protection from a Korean crime boss, while continuing to investigate organized crime in Seattle. Nothing about this situation made sense according to conventional law enforcement procedures, but Maya was beginning to understand that conventional procedures were completely inadequate for the threats she faced. Mr. Kwon, Maya said as she prepared to leave, I want to be very clear about something. This arrangement doesn't change my obligation to prosecute criminal activity. If I discover evidence of illegal operations involving your organization, I will pursue that evidence wherever it leads. Kwon Jisoo smiled, and the expression was genuinely amused rather than threatening. Attorney Richardson, if you discover evidence of illegal operations involving my organization, I will personally ensure that you have everything necessary to prosecute those responsible. Corruption is bad for legitimate business. Maya left the library hotel through the same side entrance she had used to arrive, taking multiple taxi rides and walking several blocks before returning to her apartment to pack for an extended absence. As she folded clothes into a suitcase, Maya tried to process everything that had happened, everything she had learned, everything she had agreed to do. Tomorrow morning, she would disappear into the protection of the Kwon family organization. She would continue her investigation with resources the FBI could not provide, intelligence that conventional law enforcement could not access, and protection from enemies who had already demonstrated their ability to penetrate federal security. Maya was crossing lines that would fundamentally change her relationship with the law she had sworn to uphold, but she was doing it in service of justice that could not be achieved through conventional means. By the time Maya finished packing, she had received another text message from Kwon Jisoo's number. Car will arrive at 6 a.m. to collect you. Bring only essential items. Everything else will be provided. Maya set her alarm for 5:30 a.m. and tried to sleep, knowing that when she woke up, her life as Assistant U.S. Attorney Maya Richardson would be temporarily suspended while she became something unprecedented in federal law enforcement, a prosecutor under the protection of the very criminal organization she was investigating. The black sedan arrived at Maya's apartment building at exactly 6 a.m., as pristine and intimidating as everything else connected to Kwon Jisoo's organization. Maya watched from her window as two men in expensive suits emerged to scan the street with professional efficiency before one of them approached the building's entrance. She had spent the night alternating between packing and pacing, her mind racing through the implications of what she was about to do. And now that the moment had arrived, Maya felt her carefully constructed resolve wavering under the weight of crossing this irreversible line. She carried only a single suitcase and her laptop bag, leaving behind everything that connected her to her normal life as a federal prosecutor. Maya had written a carefully worded email to Agent Chin explaining that she was taking emergency personal leave to deal with family matters, knowing that the lie would protect her investigation while buying time to pursue the Yamamoto family through channels the FBI could not access. As she locked her apartment door, Maya realized she had no idea when she would see her own home again. The drive through Seattle took 40 minutes, winding through neighborhoods Maya had never seen despite living in the city for 3 years. They passed through exclusive residential areas with gated communities and private security, then climbed into hills overlooking Elliott Bay, where custom-built estates occupied lots measured in acres rather than square feet. Maya pressed her face to the tinted window, watching her familiar city transform into something that seemed designed for people who lived by completely different rules than federal prosecutors working on government salaries. Kwon Jisu's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building that commanded an unobstructed view of the Olympic Mountains and Puget Sound. The structure itself was a study in understated elegance, all clean lines and natural materials that suggested wealth without ostentation. Maya stood in the marble foyer, staring up at a double-height ceiling supported by beams of what appeared to be reclaimed timber, while floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with morning light that made everything seem to glow with warmth and sophistication. The elevator opened directly into Kwon Jisu's private residence, eliminating any possibility of unauthorized access or unexpected visitors. Maya stepped into a living area that was larger than her entire apartment, furnished with pieces that looked like museum quality but somehow managed to feel comfortable rather than intimidating. Leather sofas the color of rich chocolate, Persian rugs that probably cost more than her annual salary, artwork that Maya suspected included original pieces by artists she had only seen in galleries. But what struck her most forcefully was the sense of home rather than showplace. Books were scattered on tables, suggesting someone who actually read them rather than displaying them for effect. A laptop sat open on the dining table, surrounded by papers and coffee cups that indicated real work rather than staged domesticity. The kitchen showed signs of actual cooking, with chef-quality knives arranged on magnetic strips and herbs growing in pots on the windowsill. "Welcome to your temporary home," Kwon Jisu said, emerging from what appeared to be an office area. He wore dark jeans and a cashmere sweater rather than his usual business attire, and the casual clothes somehow made him seem more approachable while emphasizing the lean strength of his build. "Your suite is on the 2nd level, completely private, with its own bathroom and sitting area." Maya followed him up a floating staircase that seemed to defy gravity, her footsteps silent on polished concrete steps. The guest quarters were larger than most hotel suites, decorated in calm neutrals with the same attention to detail she had noticed throughout the penthouse. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, while the sitting area included a desk, bookshelves, and a window seat that overlooked the city. Maya set her suitcase on the bed, trying to process the reality of living in luxury that exceeded anything she had ever experienced. "There's a secure phone line on the desk if you need to contact your office," Kwon Jisu said. "Internet access is provided through encrypted networks that cannot be traced by federal surveillance or criminal monitoring. Meals are prepared by a private chef, but you're welcome to use the kitchen if you prefer cooking for yourself." Maya turned to study his face, looking for signs of the dangerous crime boss she had been investigating for 2 years. What she found instead was genuine consideration, an attempt to make her feel comfortable despite the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her here. "Mr. Kwon," she said, "I want to be clear about the boundaries of this arrangement." "Of course," Kwon Jisu replied. "You are here for your protection, not for my convenience. Your privacy will be respected, your professional obligations will be accommodated, and you are free to leave whenever you feel the threat to your safety has been adequately addressed." Maya nodded, struck by his formal politeness and apparent sincerity. She had expected arrogance, manipulation, or attempts to leverage her vulnerable position for his advantage. Instead, Kwon Jisu was treating her like a respected guest rather than a captured federal prosecutor, and Maya found herself wondering if her preconceptions about his character had been as inaccurate as her assumptions about his criminal activities. Over the next week, Maya discovered that living with Kwon Jisoo was nothing like what she had anticipated based on 2 years of investigation and surveillance. He maintained a routine that began with exercise at 5 a.m., followed by breakfast while reviewing international financial reports and legitimate business correspondence. He conducted conference calls with real estate developers in Vancouver, technology investors in San Francisco, and shipping coordinators throughout the Pacific Rim, discussing ventures that sounded completely legitimate and surprisingly sophisticated. Maya worked at the desk in her sitting area, using Kwon Jisoo's encrypted internet access to research the Yamamoto family organization through databases the FBI had never mentioned. She discovered a criminal network that extended from Seattle to Los Angeles, with connections to human trafficking operations throughout Asia and money laundering schemes that involved dozens of shell companies registered in Caribbean tax havens. The more she learned about the Yamamoto family's actual operations, the more she understood how thoroughly her investigation had been misdirected toward legitimate Kwon family businesses. Their first shared meal occurred on her third evening in the penthouse, when Maya emerged from her room to find Kwon Jisoo preparing dinner in the kitchen. He moved with the same controlled precision she had observed during their surveillance, but applied to chopping vegetables and seasoning meat rather than conducting criminal business. The aroma of garlic, ginger, and sesame oil filled the space, making Maya realize she hadn't eaten anything substantial since arriving at the penthouse. "You cook," Maya said, surprised despite herself. "I learned from my grandmother before she died," Kwon Jisoo replied, not looking up from his preparation. She believed that a man who couldn't feed himself was not truly independent. "Would you like to join me, or would you prefer to eat alone?" Maya hesitated, her professional training warning her that sharing meals would create inappropriate intimacy with someone who remained her investigation target. But the alternative was returning to her room with takeout food while he ate alone in a space designed for family dinners. And something about that prospect felt unnecessarily hostile given his consideration for her comfort and safety. "What are you making?" Maya asked, moving closer to observe his technique. "Bulgogi with brown rice and banchan," Kwon Jisoo said. "Traditional Korean comfort food, though I suspect you're more familiar with the Americanized versions served in most Seattle restaurants." Maya watched him work, noting the casual competence with which he handled ingredients and the obvious pleasure he took in creating something beautiful and nourishing. This domestic side of Kwon Jisoo contradicted everything she thought she knew about his character, revealing someone who found satisfaction in simple activities that had nothing to do with criminal enterprises or organizational authority. They ate at the dining table overlooking the city, and Maya found herself relaxing despite her determination to maintain professional boundaries. Kwon Jisoo asked thoughtful questions about her legal education, her decision to pursue federal prosecution, her perspective on justice and constitutional law. His own responses revealed a sophisticated understanding of legal principles that went far beyond what she would expect from someone whose livelihood depended on criminal activity. "You have a law degree," Maya said, making it a statement rather than a question. "Columbia Law School, class of 2010, Kwon Jisoo confirmed. "I plan to practice corporate law, maybe pursue international business transactions or merger and acquisition work. I was accepted for a judicial clerkship with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals." Maya stared at him, trying to reconcile this information with everything she thought she knew about his background. "What happened to change those plans?" "My father suffered a stroke during my final semester," Kwon Jisoo said, his expression growing distant. "The family business required immediate leadership, and I was the eldest son with the education and temperament to take control of complex operations. I chose family obligation over personal ambition." Maya processed the implications of what he was saying. "You never wanted to be involved in criminal activities." "I never wanted to be involved in any activities that required violence, intimidation, or moral compromise," Kwon Jisoo said. "But the family business that my father built over 30 years included operations that existed in gray areas between legitimate enterprise and necessary pragmatism. Sometimes protecting legitimate interests requires methods that courts might find objectionable." Maya found herself leaning forward, intrigued by his perspective despite her professional skepticism. What do you mean by necessary pragmatism? Consider the Korean community in Seattle, Kwon Jisoo said. Small business owners, restaurant operators, import companies, families who work 16 hours a day to build better lives for their children. They face extortion from gangs, discrimination from banks, language barriers that prevent them from accessing legal protection. Sometimes helping them requires methods that wouldn't be necessary if legal systems adequately served immigrant communities. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving rationalization. What she found instead was genuine conviction, a belief that his actions served legitimate protective purposes even when they violated conventional legal boundaries. She began to understand how someone with his education and background might justify involvement in activities that existed outside traditional law enforcement. And the human trafficking allegations, Maya asked, are entirely accurate regarding the Yamamoto family operations that have been using our legitimate businesses as cover, Kwon Jisoo said. When we discovered their activities 6 months ago, we began documenting evidence while planning to eliminate their operations permanently. Your federal investigation actually complicated our efforts to address the problem quietly. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. You've been investigating the same crimes I have. We've been investigating crimes committed using our family name and reputation, Kwon Jisoo said. The Yamamoto family damaged our legitimate business interests while engaging in activities that violate every principle we try to maintain in our community work. Maya realized that her assumptions about Kwon Jisoo's motivations had been as flawed as her assumptions about his criminal activities. She had been investigating a man who was pursuing the same justice she sought, but through methods that federal law enforcement could not employ and using resources that conventional prosecutors could not access. Over the following days, their evening conversations became a routine that Maya found herself anticipating despite her determination to maintain professional distance. Kwon Jisoo proved to be remarkably well-read, capable of discussing everything from Supreme Court decisions to international human rights law with insight that challenged her own perspectives. He asked questions that forced her to examine assumptions about justice, law enforcement, and the relationship between legal authority and moral obligation. Maya began to see him as an intellectual equal rather than a criminal adversary, someone whose education and analytical ability matched her own despite the different paths their careers had taken. Their conversations ranged from abstract legal theory to practical questions about community protection, from constitutional interpretation to the cultural complexities of immigrant communities that existed outside mainstream American society. It was during their second week together that Kwon Jisoo revealed the personal motivation behind his protective instincts. They were sharing wine after dinner, sitting in the living area with the city lights spreading below them like scattered jewels, when Maya asked about the family photograph she had noticed on his desk. The image showed a young woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile, someone who shared Kwon Jisoo's sharp features but possessed a gentleness that suggested she had never been exposed to the darker aspects of his world. "That's my sister Jiwon," Kwon Jisoo said, his voice growing quiet as he stared at the photograph. "She was 5 years younger than me, brilliant, kind, everything good about our family's values and traditions. She wanted to be a doctor, planned to specialize in pediatrics, dreamed of opening clinics in underserved communities." Maya heard the past tense and felt her heart clench with sudden understanding. What happened to her? Jiwon became involved with someone who claimed to care about her welfare, Kwon Jisoo said. A man who presented himself as successful and legitimate, who courted her with expensive gifts and promises of a future that would allow her to pursue her medical career without financial constraints. By the time our family realized he was involved with drug distribution, she had become addicted to substances he provided to maintain control over her behavior. Maya felt tears gathering in her eyes as she processed the implications of what Kwon Jisoo was saying. She died from an overdose. She died because someone used her trust and her dreams against her, Kwon Jisoo said. Because legitimate law enforcement was unable or unwilling to address a criminal organization that targeted young women from respectable families. Because I was too focused on building my own career to notice that she needed protection from threats she didn't understand. Maya reached across the space between them, covering his hand with hers in an instinctive gesture of comfort that transcended all professional boundaries. "I'm sorry for your loss," Kwon Jisoo looked down at their joined hands, then met her eyes with an expression that was vulnerable and grateful and completely at odds with his reputation for dangerous control. Jiwon died 3 years ago, he said. Since then, I have made it my personal mission to ensure that no other young woman in Seattle's Korean community suffers the same fate. Sometimes that mission requires methods that federal prosecutors might find objectionable. Maya understood with sudden clarity why Kwon Jisoo had intervened to protect her from the Yamamoto family, why he had been so determined to prevent her death despite the complications it created for his own operations. She represented the same kind of intelligent, accomplished woman his sister had been, someone whose loss would diminish the community he was trying to protect. Your investigation into my family's operations, Kwon Jisoo continued, was actually helping the same criminal organization that killed Jiwon. The Yamamoto family has been using our legitimate businesses as cover while engaging in the exact activities that you've been trying to prosecute. By targeting the wrong organization, federal law enforcement was inadvertently protecting the real criminals. Maya felt the weight of everything she had learned settling into her consciousness like pieces of a puzzle finally revealing their proper arrangement. Kwon Jisoo was not the criminal she had spent 2 years investigating. He was someone who had chosen to work outside conventional law enforcement because legal systems had failed to protect the people he cared about most. His methods might be questionable, but his motivations were entirely consistent with her own commitment to justice and community protection. Maya realized that sometime during the past 2 weeks, her feelings toward Kwon Jisoo had shifted from professional antagonism to personal respect to something considerably more complicated and dangerous. She was attracted to his intelligence, his unexpected gentleness, his commitment to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. But more than that, she was beginning to understand that he represented a different approach to the same values that had driven her to become a federal prosecutor. As they sat together in the warm glow of the penthouse living room, Maya acknowledged to herself that her professional objectivity had been completely compromised. She no longer saw Kwon Jisoo as a criminal target, but as a complex man whose personal losses had shaped him into someone willing to sacrifice conventional morality for practical justice. She was living under his protection, eating meals he prepared, engaging in conversations that challenged everything she thought she knew about law enforcement and community safety. Maya was falling for the man she had spent 2 years trying to arrest, and she was beginning to suspect that he might represent her best hope for achieving the justice that federal law enforcement had been unable to provide. The call from Agent Chun came at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jolting Maya from sleep in the guest quarters of Kwon Jisoo's penthouse. "Maya, we need to talk immediately," Agent Chun said without preamble. "Your case has been suspended pending a Justice Department review of operational security." Maya sat up in bed, her heart immediately racing as she processed the implications of what Agent Chun was saying. "Suspended on what grounds?" Maya asked, reaching for the secure laptop that never left her nightstand. "There's been a leak within the investigation," Agent Chun said, her voice tight with frustration. "Someone has been providing classified information to targets of federal surveillance. The Deputy Attorney General has ordered a complete halt to all operations until we can identify the source of the compromise." Maya felt the blood drain from her face as she understood the true scope of what was happening. "How extensive is the leak?" she asked. "We believe someone has had access to your case files for at least 18 months, Agent Chun replied. "Witness identities, surveillance schedules, evidence collection procedures, protective custody arrangements. Everything has been compromised from the beginning." Maya closed her eyes, thinking about the 3 witnesses who had been eliminated, the men who had been waiting in her parking garage, the systematic destruction of her investigation. The Yamamoto family hadn't just been lucky or well-informed. They had been receiving classified intelligence that allowed them to stay one step ahead of federal law enforcement throughout her entire investigation. "Agent Chun," Maya said carefully, "I need you to check something for me. Cross-reference the timing of witness eliminations with access to my case files through the FBI database system." "Already done," Agent Chun said grimly. "The correlation is nearly perfect. Every witness who died or disappeared had their information accessed within 24 hours of their elimination." Maya felt sick as she processed the implications. Someone within the FBI had been systematically betraying her investigation, providing the Yamamoto family with intelligence that resulted in multiple deaths and the destruction of years of careful evidence collection. Every security measure, every protection detail, every attempt to build a case against organized crime had been undermined by corruption at the highest levels. Maya, Agent Chin continued, there's something else. Your personal security has been compromised as well. Someone accessed your home address, your daily schedule, your vehicle registration. I don't know how to tell you this, but we believe there's an active contract on your life. Maya's hands started shaking as she held the phone. What kind of contract? The kind that pays upon confirmation of death, Agent Chin said. Maya, where are you right now? We need to bring you into protective custody immediately. Maya looked around the luxurious guest quarters that had become her temporary home, thinking about Kwon Jisu's warnings about federal law enforcement corruption, about his prediction that FBI protection would be compromised before she could benefit from it. I'm somewhere safe, Maya said, but I can't tell you we're over an unsecured line. Maya, listen to me carefully, Agent Chin said. Whatever you're thinking, whatever arrangement you might have made, it's not worth your life. Come in now, and we'll sort out the security issues later. Maya ended the call without responding, her mind racing through everything she had learned during her weeks in Kwon Jisu's penthouse. The FBI investigation that was supposed to protect her had been corrupted from the beginning. Federal agents had been feeding intelligence to the very criminals she was trying to prosecute. Her witnesses were dead because someone within law enforcement had betrayed their identities to the Yamamoto family. Maya found Kwon Jisu in his office, speaking quietly into a secure phone while reviewing what appeared to be building security protocols on multiple computer monitors. He looked up as she entered, immediately reading the distress in her expression and ending his call without explanation. The FBI has suspended my investigation, Maya said. They've discovered that someone has been leaking classified information to criminal targets for the past 18 months. I know, Kwon Jisu said quietly. I've been monitoring federal law enforcement communications since you arrived here. The leak is Agent David Park, your colleague who has access to evidence databases and operational schedules. Maya stared at him, trying to process the enormity of what he was saying. David Park had been her partner on the Kwon family investigation, had attended strategy meetings, had reviewed witness statements and evidence collection procedures. If Park was working for the Yamamoto family, then every aspect of her case had been compromised from the moment it began. How long have you known? Maya asked. We identified Agent Park as a Yamamoto family asset 6 weeks ago, Kwon Jisu said. We've been feeding him false information while documenting his communications with criminal contacts. His betrayal is what allowed us to map the entire Yamamoto family network and identify their operational leadership. Maya felt a surge of anger that had nothing to do with professional disappointment and everything to do with personal betrayal. David Park had been someone she trusted, someone she had shared case strategies with, someone who had expressed concern about her safety while simultaneously providing intelligence that put her life at risk. Why didn't you tell me? Maya demanded. Because we needed the leak to continue operating in order to trace the complete network, Kwon Jisu said. And because you would have been professionally obligated to report the information to FBI Internal Affairs, which would have compromised our investigation of Yamamoto family operations. Maya was about to respond when alarms began screaming throughout the penthouse, a harsh electronic shriek that made conversation impossible. Kwon Jisu moved immediately to his security monitors, his expression growing grim as he reviewed multiple camera feeds from around the building and the surrounding neighborhood. What's happening? Maya asked, having to shout over the alarm system. Coordinated assault, Kwon Jisu said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. 24 men in 6 vehicles, professional equipment, military-grade weapons. The Yamamoto family has decided to eliminate both of us tonight. Maya felt her blood turn to ice as she watched the security monitors show armed figures taking strategic positions around the building's perimeter. These weren't the disorganized gangsters she had imagined based on her federal law enforcement training. The men on the screens moved with military precision, using hand signals and coordinated timing that suggested extensive tactical training. Kwon Jisu spoke rapidly into his secure phone, giving instructions in Korean that Maya couldn't understand, but which clearly involved defensive preparations. Steel shutters began sliding down over the penthouse windows, transforming the elegant living space into what looked like a fortified bunker. Emergency lighting activated automatically, casting everything in harsh red shadows that made the situation feel even more ominous. "How long can we hold them off?" Maya asked. "Indefinitely, if necessary," Quan Jisu replied. This building was designed to withstand coordinated assault. But the Yamamoto family wouldn't launch an operation this extensive unless they were certain they could succeed. Maya's legal mind immediately began analyzing the tactical situation, identifying the weakness that would allow attackers to penetrate seemingly impregnable defenses. "They have inside information about your security systems," Maya said. "Someone has provided them with details about your defensive capabilities." Quan Jisu's expression darkened as he processed the implications of what Maya was suggesting. "Access to building security would require cooperation from my own personnel," he said, "which means someone within my organization has been compromised by the Yamamoto family." Maya moved to the computer monitors, studying the camera feeds with the same analytical precision she brought to evidence review in federal cases. The attackers had positioned themselves to avoid certain defensive measures while focusing their assault on specific entry points, suggesting intimate knowledge of the building's security protocols. "There," Maya said, pointing to one of the monitors. "Vehicle 3 is positioned to avoid the automated defense systems that should cover the north entrance. They know exactly where your surveillance gaps are located." Quan Jisu followed her analysis, his expression growing increasingly grim as he recognized the accuracy of her observations. "Someone has provided them with current building schematics and security protocols," he said. "Information that only 4 people within my organization should have access to." Maya continued studying the tactical deployment, using skills learned during federal law enforcement training to identify patterns that revealed the attacker's strategy. "They're not trying to breach the penthouse directly," she said. "They're positioning to cut off escape routes while forcing you to exhaust defensive resources. This is a siege, not a direct assault." Quan Jisu looked at her with surprise and respect, recognizing that her analytical ability was providing insights his security team had missed. "Which of my 4 senior advisors would have access to this level of operational detail?" he asked. Maya reviewed her mental notes from weeks of observing Quan Jisu's daily routine and business operations. "Kim Taehyun attends your security briefings, but focuses on financial operations," she said. "Lee Sang-woo handles personnel, but isn't involved in tactical planning. Park Min-jun coordinates with external contractors, but doesn't have access to building defense systems. That leaves Han Dako," Quan Jisu said quietly. Maya nodded, remembering conversations she had overheard about Han Dako's responsibilities for building security and emergency protocols. "He would have access to everything the attackers are using against you," Maya said. "Current schematics, defensive capabilities, personnel schedules, communication frequencies." Quan Jisu moved to a secure communication panel, speaking rapidly in Korean while Maya continued monitoring the tactical situation on the security cameras. She watched armed figures advancing on the building's entrance, noting their professional equipment and coordinated movements with growing unease. These weren't ordinary criminals. They moved like military special forces, suggesting resources and training that went far beyond typical organized crime capabilities. The first explosion shook the entire building, causing Maya to stumble and grab the desk for support. Emergency lighting flickered, and several security monitors went dark as external cameras were destroyed by the blast. Through the remaining feeds, Maya could see smoke rising from the building's north entrance and armed figures preparing to advance through the breach they had created. "How many people do you have for defense?" Maya asked. 12 security personnel in the building," Quan Jisu replied. 8 more en route from external locations, but they won't arrive for 20 minutes. We're outnumbered 2-to-1 by attackers who have detailed intelligence about our capabilities." Maya felt fear claw at her throat as she processed their tactical situation. Even with superior defensive positions, being outnumbered by professional attackers with inside information made their survival questionable. She was a federal prosecutor who had never been in combat, trapped in a situation that required skills she didn't possess, while depending on a man whose protective capabilities were being systematically undermined by betrayal within his own organization. The lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by emergency lighting and the glow from computer monitors. Maya heard gunfire echoing through the building's lower levels, sharp cracks that indicated high-powered rifles rather than handguns. The assault had begun in earnest, and she realized with growing terror that her survival depended entirely on Kwon Jisu's ability to coordinate defensive operations while under fire from enemies who knew everything about his security arrangements. Kwon Jisu moved through the darkened penthouse with confident familiarity, gathering equipment from concealed storage locations and speaking continuously into his secure communication device. Maya followed him, trying to be useful while staying out of the way of someone who was obviously operating according to protocols she couldn't understand. Stay in the central office area, Kwon Jisu instructed. Reinforced walls, independent power supply, secure communications. If they breach the penthouse level, barricade yourself inside until help arrives. Maya grabbed his arm as he prepared to leave the office area. Where are you going? To coordinate defensive operations from the security center, Kwon Jisu said. My people need direct leadership when facing this level of assault. Maya realized with sudden clarity that Kwon Jisu was preparing to expose himself to considerably more danger in order to protect her and his personnel. You could be killed, she said. If I stay here, we'll all be killed, Kwon Jisu replied. The Yamamoto family planned this operation to ensure no survivors. Maya felt something break open in her chest, a realization that she couldn't lose this man who had become so much more than her protector or investigation target. Before she could second-guess herself, Maya reached up and kissed him, pouring weeks of suppressed feeling and desperate fear into physical contact that transcended all professional boundaries. Kwon Jisu responded immediately, his arms coming around her with fierce intensity as he returned her kiss with desperate passion that revealed feelings he had been carefully concealing. For a moment that felt like eternity, they held each other in the darkness while gunfire echoed through the building, both acknowledging what they meant to each other despite the impossible circumstances that had brought them together. Come back to me, Maya whispered against his lips. I will, Kwon Jisu promised. But if something happens to me, use the emergency protocols I taught you. Get to the safe room, contact my backup security team, wait for extraction. Maya watched him disappear into the darkness, then settled behind the reinforced desk to monitor security feeds and try to track the progress of the battle raging throughout the building. She could hear explosions, gunfire, and shouted commands in multiple languages, but the security monitors showed only fragmentary images of tactical movement and muzzle flashes. For 20 minutes that felt like hours, Maya lived with the constant fear that the next sound she heard would be confirmation of Kwon Jisu's death. She monitored radio communications, most of which were in Korean, trying to interpret tone and urgency while understanding very few actual words. The building shook periodically from explosions, and several times she heard footsteps in corridors that might indicate enemies approaching the penthouse level. Then the gunfire stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that was somehow more terrifying than the chaos that had preceded it. Maya waited, her heart hammering against her ribs, unsure whether the sudden quiet meant victory or defeat for the defensive forces. Every creak of the building, every distant sound, could indicate either rescue or discovery by enemies who had eliminated all resistance. The office door opened, and Maya nearly screamed before recognizing Kwon Jisu's silhouette in the emergency lighting. He moved slowly, favoring his left arm, and Maya could see dark stains on his shirt that indicated blood loss from wounds sustained during the fighting. Is it over? Maya asked, rushing to help support his weight. The immediate threat has been eliminated, Kwon Jisu said, his voice strained with pain and exhaustion. 21 enemy casualties, 3 surrendered and currently being interrogated. Our losses were significant but manageable. Maya helped him to a chair, then began examining his injuries with the basic first aid knowledge she had learned during federal training. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, leaving a deep furrow that was bleeding heavily but didn't appear to have damaged major arteries or bones. Shrapnel from an explosion had left multiple cuts on his arms and face, but none seemed immediately life-threatening. As Maya cleaned and bandaged his wounds, she realized that her hands were shaking not just from adrenaline, but from the recognition of how close she had come to losing him. This man who had protected her, fed her, shared his home and his history with her, had risked his life to ensure her survival against enemies who wanted both of them dead. I was terrified I would lose you, Maya said quietly as she secured a bandage around his shoulder. Kwon Jisoo looked up at her, his dark eyes serious despite his physical exhaustion. Maya, you need to understand something about tonight. The Yamamoto family launched this operation because they knew the FBI investigation was suspended. With federal law enforcement withdrawing protection, they believed they could eliminate both of us without fear of retaliation. Maya finished treating his wounds, then sat down facing him while trying to process the implications of what he was saying. They're going to try again, aren't they? Tonight's assault was carefully planned and extensively resourced, Kwon Jisoo said. They committed significant personnel and equipment to eliminating us. When they discover the operation failed, they'll escalate to methods that make tonight's attack seem restrained. Maya felt cold dread settling in her stomach as she understood what Kwon Jisoo was telling her. You're saying this was just the beginning. I'm saying that your career as a federal prosecutor is over, Kwon Jisoo said gently. The Yamamoto family will never stop hunting you as long as they believe you pose a threat to their operations. Federal law enforcement cannot protect you from enemies who have corrupted agents within the FBI itself. Maya stared at him, trying to process the enormity of what he was saying. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built during her legal career, everything that defined her professional identity, would have to be abandoned because criminal organizations had demonstrated the ability to reach her anywhere conventional law enforcement might try to hide her. But if I disappear from federal prosecution, Maya said, the Yamamoto family wins. They continue operating, more victims suffer, and justice is never served. Not necessarily, Kwon Jisoo replied. Tonight's interrogations have provided intelligence about Yamamoto family operations that federal investigators never had access to. With that information, and with evidence we've been collecting independently, it might be possible to achieve justice through methods that don't require your public involvement as a prosecutor. Maya understood that Kwon Jisoo was offering her a choice between abandoning her pursuit of justice entirely and pursuing justice through means that would require her to operate outside conventional law enforcement. She could return to her federal prosecutor role and likely be killed within days, or she could disappear from her old life and continue fighting the same criminals through channels that offered better prospects for both survival and success. What are you suggesting? Maya asked. That you help me finish what both of us started, Kwon Jisoo said. Use your legal expertise to build cases that can be pursued through channels the Yamamoto family hasn't corrupted. Work with me to achieve the justice that federal law enforcement has been unable to provide. Maya looked into his dark eyes, seeing not just the dangerous crime boss she had originally investigated, but the man who had risked everything to protect her, who shared her commitment to community safety and victim advocacy, who represented her best chance for continuing to serve justice despite the impossible circumstances that conventional law enforcement had created. Are you asking me to stay with you permanently? Maya said. I'm asking you to consider that your most important work might require methods that federal prosecutors cannot officially employ, Kwon Jisoo said. And I'm telling you that I would be honored to have your partnership in that work if you're willing to trust me with your future. Maya submitted her resignation to the Justice Department 3 days after the assault on Kwon Jisoo's penthouse, citing irreconcilable concerns about operational security and the safety of federal prosecutors pursuing organized crime investigations. She sat in her government office one final time, drafting the letter that would end her career in federal law enforcement while beginning something entirely unprecedented in her personal and professional life. The resignation letter was carefully worded to avoid any mention of the Yamamoto family, the compromised FBI investigation, or her current living arrangements with the man she had spent 2 years trying to prosecute. Maya wrote instead about her loss of confidence in federal law enforcement's ability to protect prosecutors from criminal retaliation, about her need to pursue new opportunities that would allow her to serve justice through different channels, about her decision to relocate for personal and professional reasons. Agent Chun arrived at Maya's office within an hour of receiving the resignation letter, her expression combining concern, confusion, and professional disappointment. Maya, this is insane, Agent Chun said, settling into the chair across from Maya's desk. You can't abandon your career because of threats from organized crime. That's exactly what they want you to do. Maya looked around her office, taking inventory of law books, case files, and legal awards that represented 6 years of education and 3 years of prosecution work. Everything in this room defined her professional identity, her commitment to constitutional law, her belief that justice came through legal procedures rather than extra-legal methods. But she was about to walk away from all of it because she had discovered that conventional law enforcement was inadequate for protecting both prosecutors and the communities they served. "Sarah," Maya said quietly, "how many federal prosecutors have been killed in the Pacific Northwest over the past 5 years?" Agent Chin's expression grew uncomfortable. "That information is classified, but you know the statistics aren't encouraging for people who pursue organized crime cases." Maya nodded, thinking about the 3 names Kwon Jisoo had mentioned during their first serious conversation about her safety. Sarah Mitchell, David Park, Jennifer Wu, all dead because they had believed that federal authority could protect them from enemies who played by entirely different rules. "I've been offered a position with a private legal consulting firm," Maya said. "Corporate compliance, international business law, regulatory affairs. The kind of work that doesn't involve death threats or compromised federal agents." Agent Chin leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Maya, whatever arrangement you've made, whoever has offered you this position, it's not worth destroying your career over fear. We can provide better protection, relocate you to a different district, assign you to cases that don't involve organized crime." Maya almost smiled at the irony of Agent Chin offering protection through the same federal law enforcement system that had been compromised by the very criminals they were supposed to be investigating. "No thank you," Maya said. "I think it's time for me to try a different approach to serving justice." Agent Chin studied Maya's face for a long moment, clearly recognizing that something fundamental had changed in Maya's perspective. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said finally. "And I hope you'll contact me if you ever need help dealing with whatever situation you've gotten yourself involved in." After Agent Chin left, Maya spent another hour cleaning out her desk, packing personal items, and destroying confidential documents according to Justice Department protocols. She was erasing all traces of her professional identity as Assistant U.S. Attorney Maya Richardson, preparing to become someone whose methods of pursuing justice might be more effective but would never be officially acknowledged by the legal system she was leaving behind. That evening, Maya found Kwon Jisoo in his office reviewing financial documents for what appeared to be legitimate business operations throughout the Pacific Northwest. His shoulder was still bandaged from injuries sustained during the penthouse assault, but he moved with his usual controlled grace as he explained quarterly reports and expansion plans for companies that seemed entirely removed from criminal activity. "I've resigned from the Justice Department," Maya said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Kwon Jisoo looked up from his documents, his expression serious and concerned. "How do you feel about that decision?" Maya considered the question carefully, searching her emotions for regret or second thoughts about abandoning everything she had worked toward since law school. "Relieved," she said finally. "I feel relieved that I don't have to pretend federal law enforcement can provide justice for communities that need protection from threats the government can't or won't address." Kwon Jisoo set aside his financial reports, giving Maya his complete attention. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "A legitimate business proposition that would allow you to use your legal expertise in ways that serve justice more effectively than federal prosecution." Maya felt her pulse quicken, recognizing that this conversation would determine the direction of her future, both professionally and personally. "What kind of proposition?" "Director of Legal Affairs for Kwon Family Enterprises," Kwon Jisoo said. "Salary of $200,000 annually, full benefits, equity participation in profitable ventures, complete authority over compliance and regulatory matters for all legitimate business operations." Maya stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was offering. "That's more than triple my government salary," she said. "The position requires someone with federal law enforcement experience, extensive knowledge of regulatory procedures, and the ability to ensure that all business operations meet or exceed legal standards," Kwon Jisoo explained. "You would be responsible for transforming gray area activities into completely legitimate enterprises, for ensuring that the Kwon family name becomes associated with ethical business practices rather than criminal speculation." Maya understood that he was offering her the opportunity to use her legal training in ways that could accomplish more than federal prosecution ever had. Instead of trying to arrest criminals after they had committed crimes, she would be preventing criminal activity by creating legitimate alternatives that serve the same community protection functions. What about the Yamamoto family? Maya asked. They're still operating, still threatening people, still using your family's reputation as cover for criminal activities. That problem will be resolved within the next 72 hours, Kwon Jisoo said with quiet certainty. Intelligence gathered during the assault on this building has provided everything necessary to eliminate their operations permanently. Maya felt a chill run down her spine as she processed what he was saying. You're going to kill them. I'm going to ensure that they no longer pose a threat to anyone in Seattle's Korean community, Kwon Jisoo replied. The methods used to achieve that result will be whatever proves most effective and definitive. Maya understood that she was being offered a choice between moral absolutism and practical effectiveness. She could insist that justice came only through legal procedures, even when those procedures had proven inadequate for protecting victims. Or she could accept that some situations required methods that courts might find objectionable, but that produced results conventional law enforcement could not achieve. The decision was easier than she had anticipated. Maya had seen what happened when federal law enforcement failed to protect witnesses, when criminals corrupted government agents, when legal procedures became obstacles to justice rather than pathways toward it. She was tired of watching criminals win through intimidation and system manipulation while victims suffered because prosecutors insisted on methods that didn't work. I accept your offer, Maya said. When do I start? Immediately, Kwon Jisoo said with satisfaction. Your first project will be reviewing all Kwon family business operations to identify activities that exist in regulatory gray areas. Your legal opinion will determine which operations we modify and which operations we eliminate entirely. Maya felt a surge of excitement as she contemplated the scope of what he was proposing. Instead of prosecuting criminals after crimes had been committed, she would be preventing criminal activity by ensuring that legitimate businesses provided all the services communities needed without requiring illegal methods. There's something else I want to discuss, Kwon Jisoo said, his tone becoming more personal. Something that goes beyond professional arrangements. Maya's heart began racing as she recognized the shift in his voice. What else did you want to discuss? The threats against your life will never completely disappear as long as criminal organizations believe you possess information that could damage their operations, Kwon Jisoo said. Even with the Yamamoto family eliminated, other groups might decide that targeting you sends useful messages about the consequences of investigating organized crime. Maya understood that he was building towards something significant, something that would fundamentally change their relationship. What are you suggesting? Marriage, Kwon Jisoo said simply. Legal marriage that would provide you with protections that no other arrangement could offer. Spousal privilege in legal proceedings. Inheritance rights that would ensure your financial security. Automatic citizenship in countries that might provide sanctuary if circumstances ever require relocation. Maya stared at him, trying to process the enormity of what he was proposing. You're asking me to marry you for legal protection. I'm asking you to marry me because I love you, Kwon Jisoo said, his voice gentle but completely certain. The legal protections are practical benefits that come with a commitment I want to make for entirely personal reasons. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat as she processed his declaration. 6 months ago, she had been a federal prosecutor dedicated to arresting this man. Now he was offering her marriage, professional partnership, and a future that would combine their shared commitment to community protection with resources she had never imagined possible. I love you too, Maya said, the words feeling both shocking and inevitable. But marriage seems like an enormous step given everything that's happened between us. Kwon Jisoo reached across his desk, taking her hands in his with the same gentle intensity she had come to associate with all his gestures of affection. Maya, you've already chosen to trust me with your life, your career, and your future. Marriage is simply the legal formalization of commitments we've already made to each other. Maya thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. Her investigation of his family's operations. His protection when federal law enforcement failed her. Their growing intimacy during weeks of shared meals and conversations. the assault that had forced them to acknowledge feelings they had both been trying to suppress. Her decision to abandon her federal career in favor of working with him toward justice that conventional law enforcement couldn't provide. Yes, Maya said. Yes, I'll marry you. Kwon Jisu's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually controlled expression into something radiant with joy and relief. He came around the desk to pull her into his arms, holding her with fierce tenderness that made Maya understand how completely her life had changed since the night they first met at Samsara restaurant. You're mine now, Kwon Jisu said against her lips, his voice rough with emotion. Completely mine, legally mine, forever mine. And you're mine, Maya replied, surprising herself with the possessive certainty in her voice. All of you, the dangerous parts and the gentle parts and everything in between. They were married 2 weeks later in a private ceremony attended only by Kwon Jisu's closest associates and the few federal colleagues Maya trusted enough to invite without compromising operational security. Maya wore a simple but elegant dress that cost more than her former annual salary, while Kwon Jisu looked devastatingly handsome in a custom tuxedo that emphasized his controlled strength and quiet authority. The ceremony was conducted in both English and Korean, with traditional elements that honored Kwon Jisu's family heritage and contemporary vows that reflected their shared commitment to protecting communities that conventional law enforcement had failed to serve. Maya found herself crying as she listened to Kwon Jisu promise to protect her, to trust her judgment, to support her work toward justice regardless of the methods required to achieve it. During the reception, Maya reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from federal prosecutor to wife of the man she had once investigated. 6 months ago, she had believed that justice came only through constitutional procedures and legal authority. Now she understood that justice sometimes required methods that courts couldn't acknowledge, but that communities desperately needed. Maya's new position as Director of Legal Affairs for Kwon Family Enterprises proved to be more challenging and more satisfying than anything she had done as a federal prosecutor. Instead of trying to convict criminals after they had committed crimes, she was preventing criminal activity by ensuring that legitimate businesses provided all the services communities needed. Immigration consulting instead of human trafficking. Private security instead of vigilante violence. Financial planning instead of money laundering. 3 months after their marriage, Maya received a phone call from Agent Chun with news that vindicated everything she and Kwon Jisu had worked toward. The Yamamoto family organization has been completely dismantled, Agent Chun said. Leadership eliminated, operations shut down, assets seized by federal authorities. We're crediting the success to intelligence provided by confidential informants, but frankly, we don't know how the information was gathered or who was responsible for the coordinated operation that took them down. Maya smiled, thinking about the 72 hours of careful planning that had preceded the systematic elimination of every Yamamoto family operation in the Pacific Northwest. She couldn't tell Agent Chun that the confidential informants were Kwon family intelligence operatives, or that the coordinated operation had been planned and executed by the same man Agent Chun still believed was a criminal target. I'm glad to hear that justice was finally served, Maya said carefully. Maya, Agent Chun said, I hope you're happy with your new career path. I still think federal law enforcement lost a valuable prosecutor when you resigned, but it sounds like you've found work that suits your talents. Maya looked around her office in the Kwon family corporate headquarters, taking inventory of law books, regulatory manuals, and compliance reports that represented her new professional identity. Instead of prosecuting criminals after crimes had been committed, she was preventing criminal activity by ensuring that legitimate businesses operated according to legal standards. Instead of trying to protect victims after they had been harmed, she was creating systems that prevented victimization entirely. I have found work that suits my talents, Maya said. Work that allows me to serve justice more effectively than I ever could through federal prosecution. That evening, Maya and Kwon Jisu celebrated the news about the Yamamoto family's elimination with dinner at the same restaurant where they had first met 9 months earlier. Maya wore the same black dress she had worn during her surveillance operation, while Kwon Jisu looked as elegantly dangerous as he had the night he had approached her table to warn her about threats she hadn't understood. Do you ever regret the choices you made? Kwon Jisu asked as they shared wine and reflected on everything that had changed since their first encounter. Maya considered the question seriously, thinking about her abandoned federal career, her marriage to a man she had once investigated, her new work that existed in gray areas between legal authority and practical justice. "No," she said finally. "I regret the time it took me to understand that justice isn't always served through conventional methods." Kwon Jisoo reached across the table to take her hand, his touch warm and reassuring and completely familiar after months of marriage. "I love you, Maya Richardson Kwon," he said. "I love your intelligence, your courage, your willingness to serve justice even when it requires personal sacrifice." Maya smiled, thinking about how completely her life had been transformed by the man she had married. She was no longer Assistant U.S. Attorney Maya Richardson, dedicated to constitutional law and federal prosecution. She was Maya Kwon, wife of a man whose methods might be questionable, but whose commitment to community protection matched her own, Director of Legal Affairs for an organization that achieved justice through means conventional law enforcement couldn't employ. "I love you too," Maya said. "All of you. The parts that courts would approve of and the parts that serve justice more effectively than courts ever could." As they left the restaurant that night, Maya reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from federal prosecutor investigating organized crime to wife of the man who represented her best hope for achieving the justice she had always sought. She had traded conventional morality for practical effectiveness, professional respectability for personal fulfillment, legal authority for methods that actually protected the people who needed protection most. Maya realized that she had never been happier, never felt more purposeful, never believed more completely that her work was making a meaningful difference in the world. She had found love, professional satisfaction, and effective service to justice in ways she never could have imagined when she was Assistant U.S. Attorney Maya Richardson, trying to convict criminals through procedures that criminals had learned to manipulate. 6 months later, Maya stood in a federal courtroom for the first time since her resignation from the Justice Department. But instead of prosecuting criminals, she was representing Kwon family enterprises in regulatory compliance hearings that established their operations as models of ethical business practices. Maya used her federal law enforcement experience to ensure that every aspect of her husband's legitimate businesses exceeded legal requirements, transforming a family organization that had once operated in gray areas into something that courts could only admire. As Maya presented evidence of comprehensive compliance with federal regulations, she thought about the trafficking victims who were now safe because the Yamamoto family no longer existed. She thought about the Korean community members who could operate businesses without fear of extortion because legitimate security was available through legal channels. She thought about the justice that had been served through methods that federal prosecutors couldn't employ, but that had proven more effective than anything conventional law enforcement had achieved. Maya had found her purpose not as a federal prosecutor trying to convict criminals after crimes had been committed, but as someone who prevented criminal activity by creating legitimate alternatives that served community needs. She was married to a man whose dangerous reputation concealed a commitment to community protection that matched her own. She was serving justice more effectively than she ever had through constitutional procedures and federal authority. Maya Richardson Kwon had discovered that sometimes the most important work required methods that courts couldn't officially acknowledge, but that communities desperately needed. And she had never been happier with the choices that had brought her to this new understanding of what justice could accomplish when pursued by people willing to work outside conventional limitations.